professor's experiment, a nightmare beyond the classroom. An easygoing person in our cohort, suddenly the lights went out and the room was plunged into darkness. We all let out a collective gasp when the emergency lights kicked in and illuminated the room in an eerie red glow. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, and then we heard a soft shuffling sound coming from the darkness beyond the door. We all held our breath as the door slowly creaked open and a figure stepped into the room. It was Dr. Zelman, but he looked different. His lab coat was torn and stained with blood, and his glasses were cracked. He held out his tablet, and in a robotic monotone voice he said, "Students, please follow me to the testing facility." We all stood up and followed him out of the classroom and into the hallway of the emergency. Lights flickered overhead, and we could hear more shuffling sounds coming from the darkness around us. Suddenly, we were surrounded by more figures. They were all wearing lab coats and dark glasses, and they all held out their tablets in unison. They repeated the same phrase, "Students, please follow me to the testing facility." We tried to run, but they were too fast. They chased us through the halls and into a large room filled with strange machines and equipment. In the center of the room was a large metal table with straps and restraints. We were shoved onto the table and strapped down. The figures began to connect us to the machines and inject us with strange fluids. We all screamed and struggled, but it was no use. We were trapped. Suddenly a voice boomed out over the speakers, "Welcome to the final exam, students. You have been selected to participate in a groundbreaking experiment in human potential. You are the future leaders of our world, and we must ensure that you are the best of the best. Prepare yourselves for the ultimate test of your abilities." The machines began to whir and beep, and we all felt an intense pain as our bodies were subjected to unthinkable stress and pressure. We screamed in agony, begging for it to stop, but the figures continued to watch us with their dark glasses and emotionless expressions. As the hours passed, we lost track of time and our senses began to blur. Some of us passed out from the pain, while others endured it until their bodies could take no more. The machines continued to beep and whir, and the figures continued to watch us with their cold, detached gaze. At some point, I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a hospital bed. My body ached all over, and I had no memory of how I had gotten there. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through my chest, and I realized that I was hooked up to a machine. A nurse came in and explained that I had been part of a medical experiment gone wrong. Dr. Zelman, my professor, had been conducting secret experiments on his students to enhance their physical and mental abilities, but something had gone wrong, and we had all been injured. I was lucky to have survived, she said. Some of my classmates were not so fortunate. They had suffered severe injuries or had died during the experiment. The hospital staff was still trying to figure out what had happened and how to prevent it from happening again. As I lay in the hospital bed, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread and fear that had taken hold of me. The memories of those dark figures with their emotionless expressions and the machines that had caused us such excruciating pain kept replaying in my mind. Days passed, and I was finally released from the hospital. But I couldn't go back to my old life. The experience changed me in ways that I couldn't fully comprehend. I had nightmares every night, and I would wake up sweating and shaking. I started researching Dr. Zelman's experiments and found out that he had a long history of conducting unethical experiments on his patients. Many of them had ended up with permanent physical and mental damage, while others had disappeared without a trace. The more I dug, the more I realized that I had been lucky to survive. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. I assumed it was just my imagination, but as the footsteps grew closer, I realized that someone was there. My heart raced as I listened to the slow, deliberate footsteps that were coming closer and closer to my bedroom door. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a dark figure emerged from the shadows. It was one of the doctors who had worked with Dr. Zelman, and his eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The doctor approached my bed and leaned in close to my face, his breath hot against my skin. "You should have never come to that hospital," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I closed my eyes and tried to calm myself down, but when I opened them again, the doctor was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, my mind racing with questions and doubts. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice that someone was following me. At first, it was just a feeling of being watched, but soon I started to see the same dark figure lurking in the shadows whenever I left my apartment. I tried to confront him, but he always managed to disappear before I could get a good look at his face. One night, as I was walking home from the grocery store, the figure suddenly lunged at me from behind a tree. I screamed and tried to fight him off, but he was too strong. He pinned me to the ground and whispered in my ear, "You're never going to be safe. We'll always be watching you." I struggled to break free, but it was no use. The figure held me down until I blacked out. When I came to, I was in a dark room with no windows. I could hear the sound of machines humming in the background, and my body was racked with pain. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw and my mouth was dry. Suddenly, the door opened and Dr. Zelman walked in. He had a sinister grin on his face, and his eyes glinted with an otherworldly light. "Welcome back," he said, his voice smooth and unemotional. "We have some more experiments to conduct." My heart raced as Dr. Zelman approached me with a syringe in his hand. "No, please," I begged, trying to break free from the restraints that held me down, but they were too tight. Dr. Zelman ignored my pleas and injected the liquid into my arm. A sudden surge of pain shot through my body, and I screamed until my throat went hoarse. But the pain didn't stop. It only grew more intense with each passing second. As the hours passed, I lost track of time. My mind was a blur of agony, and I couldn't tell what was real and what was just a hallucination. But through the haze, I could hear Dr. Zelman's voice whispering in my ear. "We're going to make you better," he said, his voice laced with malice. "You'll be one of us soon." I didn't know what he meant, but the fear of the unknown was almost worse than the pain. I prayed for it to end, but it didn't. It just went on until I couldn't take it anymore. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pain began to recede. But as my mind cleared, I realized that something was wrong. I could feel a strange energy coursing through my veins, and my body was no longer under my control. I tried to scream, but only a guttural growl escaped my lips. My eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and I could see the world in a way I never had before. Everything was sharper, clearer, and more vibrant. Dr. Zelman approached me with a smirk on his face. "Welcome to the family," he said, holding out his hand. "You're one of us now." I tried to resist, but it was no use. The energy inside me was too powerful, and it compelled me to take his hand. As I did, I felt a surge of dark energy flow through me, and I knew that I was changed forever. From that moment on, I was no longer just a human. I was something else entirely, something that Dr. Zelman called a hybrid. He explained that he had injected me with a serum that combined human DNA with that of a supernatural being, giving me incredible powers beyond my wildest dreams. But with those powers came a price. I was now bound to Dr. Zelman and his mysterious organization, forced to do their bidding and carry out their dark deeds. And as time went on, I began to realize that the pain and suffering I had endured was only the beginning of the horrors I would face as one of them. But despite all of that, there was a small part of me that couldn't help but feel exhilarated by my newfound abilities. I could do things that were once impossible, and I was no longer bound by the limitations of my human body. And as I looked into Dr. Zelman's eyes, I knew that I had made a deal with the devil. But at that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that I was no longer powerless and that I had the strength to take on anything that came my way.